Medieval England, a post-classical feudal society composed of warring monarchies vying for control over British land. The Roman Empire has crumbled and left England, leaving the British Isles open to barbarian invaders and new cultural influences. Without Roman infrastructure, the Saxons invade, bringing their pagan religion with them. After a long period of highly decentralized Anglo-Saxon rule, Christianity was reintroduced to English society. Without a strong state infrastructure, the church rose in power, performing functions of the state such as education and welfare. This era is often called the Dark Ages because relatively few records survived. Churches and castles are the main type of architecture which remains from this period.
When Rome fell, English architectural traditions changed. The Roman roads and villas weathered into disuse, and while many Anglo-Saxons built churches, most of them were destroyed by Viking invasion. In fact, because this period was so violent, many churches ended up looking like defensive fortresses. In the 11th century, the Normans introduced two distinctive styles into English architecture, Romanesque and Gothic.
Let's go talk to an expert.
The Gothic architecture style was brought by the Normans from France when they conquered England in 1066 CE. It evolved from Romanesque architecture, which is characterized by large, solid stone buildings with rounded arches. The Normans were really notable for their castles and churches, many of which were built off of existing Anglo-Saxon structures. Romanesque architecture began to be embellished by ornamentation, buttresses, and pointed arches, which eventually made up the Gothic style. These changes came as a result of new farming techniques, which could support a larger population. A larger population meant more people could be taxed for cathedral projects. In addition, new mathematical learning introduced the technical skills needed to build larger and more elaborate buildings. One famous Gothic cathedral is the Westminster Abbey on the River Thames. The majority of the current church was built in 1245 by Henry III in a Gothic style influenced by French cathedral architecture. The church is the traditional site of coronations, marriages, and burials of the British royal family. At the time it was built, it had the highest nave out of any church in England. The nave is the central aisle and ceiling of the church.
During this time, the church played a prominent role in England. However, since most of the population were illiterate, they couldn't read any biblical stories. To get around this, the church worked them into their architecture.
Glass like this was often built into churches. The large windows in Gothic architecture allowed room for elaborate stained glass. The glass tells a biblical story which people could understand because it was all visual. Let's go talk to an expert.
Most glass was manufactured in various locations in France and mainland Europe. Sheets of glass were then transported to their final locations, where they would be colored in plants near the churches that they would eventually adorn. Some glass had impurities which lent inherent color to it, but in other cases, color was deliberately added with minerals such as copper or gold. The Great East Window at York Minster Abbey is the size of a tennis court, the largest example of medieval stained glass. Created between 1405 and 1408, the window shows the story of the beginning of the world, as told in the book of Genesis, and signs that will foretell the coming of the apocalypse.
There were also castles during this time in England. Their primary use was for protection, but as time went on, they became more and more sophisticated. Castles like these were some of the Normans' biggest additions to the culture of England. However, castles weren't originally made out of stones like the ones in fairy tales. They started as wooden buildings constructed on top of a mound circled by a moat. Gradually, they evolved into the ones you're probably thinking of, with thick stone walls, moats, drawbridges, parapets, dungeons, and more. Let's talk to an expert to find out more about these fascinating constructions.
When the Normans came, England was very unstable. The Normans built sturdy castles to defend against feudal warfare in their characteristic style. Norman castles featured a keep protected by a ditch or a fosse, surrounded by workers' houses, all encompassed in a wooden barricade. However, this method soon became obsolete, with Norman-descended lords building Edwardian-designed castles, which ditched the keep and moat in favor of concentric rings of walls. These walls allowed the castles to be more dangerous to the attackers, with more battlements to retaliate against invaders. Lords were not free to build whenever they wanted, however. They needed permission from the king. The Tower of London is a famous example of a Norman-era castle. After the last Anglo-Saxon king, King Edward, died, there was a power struggle for the throne. This left England open to invasion from the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. After taking the throne, William was worried about controlling the largest city of England, London. So, to enforce his rule, he instructed his army to build fortifications to intimidate the Londoners. A few years later, in the 1070s, William instructed Bishop Gundulf to create the White Tower, or what we call the Tower of London today. Over the centuries, as its importance increased and more defense was needed, a series of walls were built around it, becoming the building we know today.
Wow. Castles, stained glass, and Gothic architecture. Thanks for watching this week's episode. Make sure to tune in for next time. We will be covering feudal Japanese architecture in Zen Gardens in an action-packed episode you are sure to love. Now, smash that like button and make sure to subscribe to our channel.
Go! Go! When? Most glass is manufactured in various locations.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there.